In this week's episode, I'm joined by Chris Simmons, him, trailblazing diversity leader, author, keynote speaker, and collector of a lot of firsts. So I'm going to ask Chris about a bunch of his firsts. This week, our conversation is about neurodivergent inclusion at EY, a more accessible Yelp, Harry Potter, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Chris, welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you today.
Chris, tell us about yourself. And start telling us about some of your firsts, because you're a really inspiring guy, and it's a true honor to know you. And you are a trailblazer. So thanks for being on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. And so I'll tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, in a all-Black, lower middle-class neighborhood. Always was yearning to understand the world I didn't know, though. So, for example, I transferred myself, not my parents' idea, to an all-white high school in 10th grade so I could prove to myself that I could be excellent anywhere. And I had the second highest GPA at that school that year. And then I realized that to get into a great college, I ended up going to Harvard, that you needed to show some leadership in your high school experience. And back in 1970s, when I was in high school, I'll just say my white classmates weren't going to elect me to the position of dog catcher in Memphis. So I went back to my neighborhood high school, where I was very actively involved in leadership roles, and then went on to Harvard and spent the first 20 so of my years in finance and banking and mergers and acquisitions. Distinguished myself there, made partner, ended up being the head of PwC's mergers and acquisitions department. And then somebody got the bright idea to have me run diversity, which really has changed my life. And a lot of people thought it was a career mistake at the time, because they thought diversity was this soft thing that nobody paid attention to. But I had always had some viewpoints, having climbed that mountain as a minority myself, that a lot of the ways that the programs worked didn't really have the biggest impact on people's success. And so I really was excited to do the task. And so the first, and it I think was shocking, was that instead of my first priority as the new head of diversity at PwC being something to do with Blacks or women, which is what I think they were expecting, I decided to fix the fact that we hadn't said much at all about the LGBTQ environment. And when I first mentioned it to one particular very senior person, he said to me, "I don't think the partners are ready for that yet." And I said to him, "Well, if people at your level wait for everybody to be ready for things, I guess Black guys like me will still be picking cotton in Mississippi." My CEO was very supportive and basically sent out a note to the partners shortly thereafter that basically said, if you can support gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people, there's a place for you. If you can't support them, maybe you don't belong at this firm. And so what I was very proud of was that when we first started the initiative, 13 partners that identified as such refused to have their identities revealed to the firm. And a year later, they all agreed to have a full revealing, because we had demonstrated to them that you're welcome. It's the other guys that aren't. And then the second first was I had been told by a lot of corporate diversity types that diversity programs didn't need to focus on Asians, especially in the white collar environment, because we're all hiring plenty of them. I said, yeah, I can see that, but I don't see them being senior VPs and EVPs and partners. So maybe we need a focused program on Asians. And so we started an Asian focus. And what I discovered was that if I went around and met with, in one of our 57 offices at the time, if I went around and met with a group of Black folk, I found out every complaint they had within 20, 30 minutes. When I would meet with the Asians, I would have to have longer meetings because they were so hesitant to complain at first. But after about an hour, then they told me what they didn't like about what was going on. And so we tailored our initiative because the different demographic groups had such different challenges. One group has the presumption of being highly qualified, another group has the presumption of being incompetent.
Right.
As reflected by even the current political situation where people are questioning whether Kamala Harris is smart or not. I mean, like, really? So, the misogyny manifests itself different ways for different groups, and so does the racism. And then we decided to have one more first that I'll mention right now, which is that we decided to have open dialogue about race and gender and sexual orientation and identity. And we basically put together a program where partners were encouraged and equipped to have one-on-one conversations that just started by saying, hey, I know you're whatever you are, fill in the blank. Tell me how that makes life more difficult for you at a firm like ours. And then just sit back and listen. And what I was really proud of in that instance, and this is, I think, a reminder to diversity leaders as to who their allies can be. The partners who didn't want to do this, they tried to hide behind legal risk at first. They said, oh, well, we can't start a conversation about that because, somebody will think we're discriminating just by bringing it up. And our general counsel head stood up at a big partner meeting and said, don't try to hide behind me. I actually think being aggressive about this stuff reduces our eventual legal risks. Go have those conversations. But, that was something that happened because I had made an ally of him. He was just a great guy anyway. But I think in a lot of cases, diversity leaders are too siloed away from the general counsel's office and need to form, more allyship. So those were a few of our firsts.
Wow. I mean, and as a lesbian, I'll say thank you for being an early ally of the LGBTQ community internally at your firm, and I'm sure externally as well. So thank you. I love that because it just is showing that, you need to take a broad perspective on what diversity is. You need to look at every individual as an individual and what their unique needs might be, certainly as communities as well. But I appreciate that you sort of brought that lens to the work, which I'm sure just benefited everyone and set more people up for success, which of course then is better for the firm. So it's great all around.
One other thing that we did was a little bit controversial at the time. When I started meeting with the women's groups, I basically said to the women that I thought that they had been listening to too many speakers who were trying to teach them how to change male behavior. And I basically said, you're not going to change male behavior. We can put processes in place to try to make sure that the institution doesn't facilitate the bad outcomes of certain male behavior. But the most important thing to you as a woman trying to move up the ranks can do is learn how to beat the men at their own game. And one of the things I was most proud of was that the head of the New York Women's Partner Group at PwC asked me, and I agreed to do it. Every time I went to New York, which was like at least once a week, I would take 4 or 5 women partners to dinner, and they would tell me about like real issues they were having with some guy, whether it be a client, a prospect, or one of our fellow partners. And then I would give them tactical advice on how to deal with him.
Wow. So, that's great. That's great.
It was very in the trenches, if you will.
I can tell. Thank you. So, Chris, what are you up to these days? Just tell us a little bit about where your career how it's shifted.
So after I retired from PwC in the intervening years, I've been trying to, take those experiences that I had, as a professional climbing the ladder myself, as a person who ran diversity, and then as a person who ran a business unit and had to deal with the realities of trying to implement diversity while also having to make a budget and pair that with certain constituencies. So I've been doing presentations and speeches to aspiring professional groups, retreats for young aspiring professionals. But on the other side, also speaking to corporate leaders, their meetings to get some of them to be more effective in their outreach and their retention efforts, and also just in their ability to make everybody who's not like them feel like you love them.
Mm.
I actually talk a lot about love and leadership. I have a view. My father was a minister, and he always wanted me to go into the ministry. And I finally got him to understand that my view was that I was a corporate preacher, and I was
Mm.
inspiring everybody I touched to live a little differently in the way they led their people. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm having a lot of fun talking to corporations and law firms about those topics.
I love that. Well, in this week's Five Things, I wrote about some of the, I'm so tired of talking about this, honestly, Chris, but, some of the DEI retraction this week, we found out Molson Coors is pulling back from the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. Some other companies have as well. Molson Coors here in Chicago, they've hosted Equality Illinois events, LGBT Chamber of Commerce events here. And I don't know whether they're going to keep doing it, but we keep seeing these headlines. And I guess, having been such a pioneer in this industry and such an early ally internally for LGBTQ, can you talk to me about sort of where you think things are going? Is this all hype? Like, what's going on?
Oh, I think it's overblown in the media for sure, and
Mm-hmm.
to some extent in social media, where we listen to a few extremists out there. But I do think companies, listen to some of that noise. And
Yeah.
so I think what I see mostly happening is companies trying to do what they've been doing, but do it in a quieter way. Uh,
Mm.
if I have a concern, however, it's that as a result of the Supreme Court ruling, some companies are altering their programs in ways that go beyond what's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It's also given the longtime naysayers more of a platform to say why you shouldn't be doing anything. But on the whole, I think things are still progressing in a positive way. But I think it's an environment in which the supporters and the allies are going to have to get a little bit more sophisticated in what they do and how they do it. And I have come up with a new phrase, ally for the moment. We need to find ways to do what the senators on Capitol Hill do. They go and make friends with a guy over or a woman over one issue, and then they get that done, and they go back to hating each other. I'm not proposing hate, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
We can't insist that everybody be a full supporter because they're hearing a lot of voices these days.
Sure, that makes sense. And I will be here. I'm going to be giving good vibes every week. So ignore the headlines and come for the good vibes because there's a lot of good stuff still happening. All right, let's get into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from Yelp, which expanded its accessibility features, adding 8 new search attributes to help users with disabilities find businesses that meet their needs. So this can be ADA compliant restrooms, ASL proficient staff, and some others, wheelchair accessible. I love this. I mean, 42 million Americans have disabilities, so this is really significant.
Yeah, I saw that, and I really applaud that. I think it's smart business, but it's also just good citizenship to try to make
Mm-hmm.
all experiences more accessible to everybody. And that old phrase, "To whom much is given, much is expected." So I think any major company that's doing well ought to try to find ways to do things that include more people, as Yelp did, and whether it actually makes them more money or not.
Yeah, it's expanding the market, and even if it's not always done with intentionally to expand the market, it's also appealing to people without disabilities because those are folks who might have friends or family. They might be empathetic allies, and you know what? We know that I read closed captions. Like so many other folks are benefiting.
Absolutely, no, that was a wonderful move on their part.
Okay, the second story comes from the Harry Potter Quidditch Championship game, which is a new video game that allows players to select they them pronouns. Now, I love this because J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, has been very anti-trans on social media, and I think this is kind of a little dig at her. And of course, it expands inclusion for folks who are trans and non-binary.
This is an example of great corporate courage because clearly there's some states and places where people are going to say you're convincing my child to be something I don't want them to be, or affiliate with something I don't want. And I think this is another example of where we need to just all decide that let everybody figure out who they are. We don't come out of the womb with any labels on us.
That's right.
Only society does that. So
yeah,
I thought it was another great move, but one that people should understand as an example of an entity showing courage, because there will be people who will not let their children now play the game because they have that in there. Hopefully they'll get some other training someplace else.
Yeah, I'm sure that they will. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube as well. All right. The third story this week comes from EY, which launched the Neurodiverse Center of Excellence in 2016 that has employed 500 plus neurodivergent workers to drive innovation in cybersecurity, finance, and more. So that's cool. But what is great is that they are setting these folks up for some success. They're providing tools like Text Help, which aids employees with speech, writing, and communication tasks. They're providing training for their managers, specifically on neurodivergent inclusion, and they're giving these employees access to job coaches. As a result, a 92% retention rate. How about that?
Again, I think it shows companies, number one, needing to get all the talent they can find. Number two, realizing that, a lot of these people actually are more talented than those of us who think we're normal, whatever normal is. And,
right.
and I think that kind of program where they have a center of excellence is a great way. I know my old firm, PwC, has a big effort. It's done a little differently. I don't know if they have a center of excellence, but what I do know is that they have some programs to put neurodivergent people into the mainstream business units and give these similar tools. So I'd like to see a day when you have a center of excellence and you also have people just working everywhere where you can't tell where somebody's going to be placed by any aspect of their background whatsoever.
That's right. As long as they're set up for success and as long as they have an inclusive environment that's really going to help them thrive.
Just on this one point, Bernadette, one of my misgivings is that 20 years ago, I gave one of my staff people an assignment, which was to go forge an alliance with Gallaudet, I think the school for the blind.
Hearing impaired.
In DC.
I think it's deaf. Yeah.
He never got it done. And every time I think about that old staff person, I think about that they didn't get that done because, there's a lot of folk that we could have helped and they could have helped us too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Creating a win-win for everyone is really what I love to see. Okay, the fourth story this week comes from the Philadelphia Marathon, which will award equal prize money for men, women, and non-binary racers. So the interesting thing here is the equal prize money, because recently in the New York City Marathon, non-binary winners did not earn a cash prize. So it's like, well, thanks for the little bit of inclusion. Now let's take it a little bit. So let's throw in some equity.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different arguments on both sides of this thing. I've had people say, well, there are fewer contestants in a certain category, so therefore it shouldn't get as much money. I guess there's some logic to that, but there's enough money floating around these events. It's not like they're cash strapped, right?
Right.
So I think this was a smart move, and I expect you'll see more entities not trying to make these distinctions, because then you slide down the slippery slope of the men's U.S. soccer team versus the women, and you got the NBA and the WNBA, and the bottom line is they're all at the top of their game for the category they're in. And frankly, I've gotten to the point where I'd rather watch a women's basketball program than a men's or girls' high school basketball contest than the other. So I think people are making assumptions about which categories are drawing people. I frankly think that given some of the challenges that non-binary people sometimes face, there'll be a lot of interest in seeing those people compete.
Exactly. And shout out to the Chicago Sky. Hope they take it all the way. All right. The last story this week comes from the new monuments, which are paying tribute to Black women. So Charlottesville's Memorial to Enslaved Laborers is one of the many new monuments installed to replace Confederate monuments and honor previously marginalized figures. So new memorials in Wisconsin, Vermont, Buffalo, New York. There have been hundreds that have gone up. And some of these are paying tribute to women like Vel Phillips, former Secretary of State of Wisconsin, abolitionist, Sojourner Truth. I mean, it's finally, Chris, I have to say a lot of these stories at the end of the day are like, finally.
Well, obviously growing up in the South, I saw a lot of Confederate stuff.
Yeah.
I'm very happy when they put up the new stuff. I actually wish they would leave up the old stuff next with an explanatory panel to show, just how messed up the environment was that caused that first thing to be erected, because it is a part of the history that people want to erase. And, I think the statue to the Black women is significant on another level too, because even within the Black community, Black women have never gotten their just due, which is kind of ironic, because if you look at almost any successful Black person on TV, the first thing they want to say is, "Hey, mama." They hardly ever say it. So we know deep down that our women have been driving things and keeping the budget straight and all this stuff for years. And then all of a sudden, when it's time for somebody to be on stage, we think it needs to be a man. It's crazy. And so this is a good vibe to start telling that side of the story, outside and inside the Black community.
No, I appreciate that perspective. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because if it's just completely erased, then, we can be ignorant.
Which some people want us to be ignorant.
Yeah, well, that's true too. That's true too. We'll never forget. Can't
Well,
forget.
some people want to ban books and tell us what not to study in school. I mean, growing up in Tennessee, my brother found some old textbooks that we had when we were in school, and you would be amazed at how wonderfully described the KKK was in our text, for example.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess I probably wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately. All right. Chris, can you tell folks how they can get in touch with you?
I'm very easily found on LinkedIn under Chris Simmons, MBA, because there's another Chris Simmons at 3 out there, so I had to add MBA. So don't think I think I'm special because I have an MBA. That was differentiate myself from some of the others. Or you can send me a direct email at initial C Simmons Lead, C my last name Simmons LEAD @gmail.com.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And you've been an awesome guest. Really appreciate you bringing your own energy, your own experience, and good vibes to this week's show. This week's call to action is to read this article by my friend Julie Kratz in Forbes, which, by the way, is about PwC, how PwC measures the impact of inclusion. So big shout outs to PwC in today's show. All right, folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.